Yemen UN Special Envoy, Mr. Martin Griffiths. Welcome to Al-Arabiya, sir.
Thank you very much.
You've been shuttling, you've been going from place to place, talking to different groups and parties, and after the disappointment of not convening the consultation in Geneva, can you share with our viewers the good news after your talks with the Houthis? If you have good news, God knows we know, and the Yemeni people needs them now.
I think they do. I think we all do. People often accuse me of optimism, and I, again, plead guilty to that charge too. Optimism is vital. Yes. Cautious optimism. Yes. As I say, it's not the opposite of realism. And I was disappointed, like everybody was, with what happened in Geneva, or what did not happen in Geneva. Okay. And so after that, we went on a round of visits, both in Muscat and then Sana'a and then in Riyadh. And the striking and important conclusion, one of the first ones from that, was that both parties, the government of Yemen and Ansar Allah, reconfirmed to me their desire to be convened to consultations. So that's the first thing. And that's good that they say it. It's not quite enough, but it's a good start. Secondly, the reasons for that were reconfirmed to me as well by both sides, not by only one, which was that the reason they want to do this is that they both recognize, as does the entire UN Security Council, that there is no other solution to this war apart from through that process. So yes, I'm encouraged, and now what we're doing is we're working on ways in which we can get them back together again as soon as possible.
How far you succeeded so far in drawing the map that lead or the road to that sit down together, or not sit down together, but be in the same place and do some consultation and think forward how to reach the safety?
Well, the first thing that I'm trying to do, with some success, I'm glad to say, is that we were going to discuss in Geneva a number of confidence-building measures. These are measures designed to alleviate the situation in Yemen, opening of Sana'a International Airport, the payment of salaries for civil servants, the release of prisoners from both sides. You don't actually need to be in the same building to make agreements on this. So we're making progress, I think, on all of those issues by shuttling between the parties, and including, of course, the coalition. I'm hoping that within the next week or so we'll be able to publish agreements which will outline how these three issues need to be resolved. So that's the first thing.
How about missiles lobbing on Saudi Arabia?
I'd love to get at the issues.
How about opening a humanitarian corridor to Taiz? These are all confidence-building measures.
Taiz is a very interesting example. I'm glad you raised it, and I mentioned it to the Security Council when they met after Geneva. I had the opportunity for a meeting in August of a wide variety of very distinguished Yemeni figures, not affiliated to either of the parties. And they came together in the United Kingdom, and we had a couple of days together in Sussex countryside. And one of the things they all said to me was, look at Taiz. Taiz is complicated, it's difficult, it's suffered terribly, it's ripe for action to provide local ceasefires, to open the road between the parties. Mm-hmm. And just a couple of days ago, the governor of Taiz came to see one of my colleagues in Aden and described to him the work that is potential there. So I'm very keen that we get moving on that. I believe profoundly from this and other conflicts that while you may do all you can and all you like to do and as much as you can on this high road of political negotiation, you must also pay attention to the business of trying to make people's lives better during the war. That's what we want to do in Taiz. But we want to do it within a context of getting the parties back together. And we are working on that as well.
Does the confidence-building measures include things like not threatening international marine movement in the Red Sea? How far will these confidence-building measures go, if I may ask you that?
I'd love to know the answer to that too. For me, and I think for you, and I think for the people of Yemen, de-escalation, as they call it, which is bringing down the tempo of war, stopping missiles, stopping strikes on civilians, stopping all the things that make people's lives in a war a misery. We must all work towards that. I'm not sure that that's something that is easiest to do at the beginning. I think it's something that should come with negotiations. And in fact, one of the interesting aspects of the negotiations in Kuwait, which were held in 2016 for 3 months, you remember.
We were so close.
They were very close. They looked at all the issues, by the way, that need to resolve this conflict. And it's a huge Quran for me that we have this resource of wisdom that we can look at to find solutions. But the other thing that happened in Kuwait, there was a ceasefire. It worked pretty well across the country. Now, if we could achieve that in Yemen in the coming months, I think we'd all be very happy. But what I won't do, because I think this will be a mistake, is to make stopping the war a condition for efforts to resolve it.
Let me summarize to our viewers what you just told me. So we're going to have confidence-building measures by remote control from afar. Shuttling, okay. And there are three prongs for the start.
For the
beginning. And that will precede any consultation or negotiations that you are trying to convene.
Well, in the sense that I think we should get on with those while we prepare to bring the parties back together. There's no reason to wait.
Yes.
And I'm very encouraged by the fact that there's a huge appetite on both sides to make progress on this. So, for example, the release of prisoners. Both sides have an equal interest in getting the prisoners out. There are about 5,000 prisoners taken on each side who need to be able to go back to their families. Both sides believe in this. So let's get on with that. Let's not wait for another round of consultation to do that. Meanwhile, however, as one ambassador has been pointing out to me today, that's no substitute for addressing the substantive issues to resolve the conflict. That's why we've got to get back to the table.
I'm sure the Houthis want guarantees from you that the other side will reciprocate. Foreign Minister Yemeni wants guarantee when I interviewed him, given as well that this will work, that the road to Taiz will be open, that the missile will stop. I mean, that the detainees will be released, etc., etc. Who's going to give these guarantees? Because, to be honest, with all observers, in the Middle East are pointing out too that the Houthis promised in the past and they did not deliver.
The agreements that I'm trying to create are voluntary. They're not agreements enforced or imposed by anybody. And there's a reason for this, is because agreements which are imposed don't work anything like as well as ones which are voluntarily entered into. The real guarantee, and I know it's not quite an answer to Minister Al-Yamani's question, but I'll start with this one, is if both sides want something to happen, they'll make it happen. That's the most fundamental guarantee. And that's not just about Yemen, that's about every conflict that I've ever been involved in. If there's a will, there's a way.
Yes.
That's the first answer. The second answer, however, is that you build into the process of compliance with an agreement a series of steps which only yield results as each side produces what they've agreed to do. That's the second form of guarantee. So there's a system of overlapping steps, and this is clearly going to be part, as was discussed in Kuwait, of any final agreement. Third answer to your question, I think, is that the UN is a witness. The UN, through me, but also through the Security Council, is a witness and an observer to agreements made. And if agreements made are not resolved or are not adhered to or not administered to, the UN has its instruments for dealing with it. So I'm very privileged to represent the Secretary General in a situation where we have the international community's support. That support carries a certain amount of beady observation of what goes on in Yemen.
You're a man of God, and you're a humanitarian. You started your life as a humanitarian, and you still, I'm sure, you're a humanitarian. Deep down in your heart, do you believe that the two parties are negotiating in good faith? There are no guarantees, but if there's no good faith, there is no solution.
I think it's a very, very important question. It's a central question to any process of trying to resolve a conflict. And a conflict is always about enemies. So when you begin trying to put them together, there is no good faith. There's no trust between them. This is why we try to build confidence.
Yes.
It comes through a mutual observation that their interests will be served better by stopping fighting than by continuing fighting. I do believe very strongly, and I believe this in my heart as well as from everything that I hear from all range of Yemenis and people in the region, is that this conflict isn't serving the interests of the parties, and it's certainly not serving the interests of Yemenis. That bedrock is what I have to work with the parties to build their trust with each other. It's going to be a process of building, but I think we've got the basis for doing it, and in a way that frankly gives us more hope for the resolution of the Yemen conflict than of some other conflicts in the region.
Just before Anga, the Secretary General Antonio Guterres held a conference, and I asked him about how many governments did they recognize in Yemen. I mean, it was more or less a provocative question.
Yes.
And I'm sure you've seen it, and he said we only recognize the legitimate government, headed, of course, he means by President Hadi.
Yes.
Now, I understand as well the Houthis consider themselves a legitimate government. When you're dealing with them, how do you deal with this perception that they have about themselves, that they are a legitimate government? And when you write an agreement like Hodeidah and you say the legitimate government, they think you're talking about them, or they want to be. See, as if you're talking about. How do you deal with such a problem?
You know, the United Nations, I've had the privilege, this is my 7th time to join the United Nations, and I've had the privilege in many, many different parts of the world of dealing with this issue. I, for example, led UN negotiations with the Taliban in 1998, when the Taliban claimed to be the government of Afghanistan, as you remember. And I signed an agreement with them, in fact, on behalf of the United Nations. This is not the first time that we deal with de facto authorities. I dealt with Laurent Kabila in the period when he was eventually toppling the government of President Mobutu. This is not the first time. I deal with the
But don't
Houthis.
you give them some sort of legitimacy?
I deal with the Houthis with respect, I hope.
Yes.
I try, and I think we should do this as a humanitarian with all people. We certainly teach our children to behave like this. We treat the Houthis, and I do from my heart, with respect. I don't take part, as you know, in condemning one side or the other. I'm being criticized for that, but I keep away from it. And of course I treat the government of Yemen with respect. And of course the Secretary General is right. The government of Yemen is recognized by the General Assembly of the United Nations, and I am a United Nations official. I don't allow that obvious distinction, which is clear and unequivocal, to get in the way of trying to find agreement between these two parties.
If the Houthis are hesitant to engage, how are you going to get the parties to agree to anything? I mean, if they, and this has been demonstrated time after time, how are you going to convince them to come to the negotiating table?
Do you know what? I don't need to. I don't need to. They want to come to the negotiating table. They keep telling me they want to come to the negotiating table. I had that reconfirmed by Abdul Malik al-Houthi last week. They want to come. They want a settlement. If I didn't think that, I would not believe the point I was making to you earlier, which is they reconfirm their desire to get there.
But on what reference points? Is it 2216? Is it the Gulf Initiative? Is it the outcome of the national dialogue, which everybody talk about these three reference points?
I'm sure you should ask them that question. I'm guided by those references. I'm also guided by trying to find a solution to this conflict, which is, again, according to those resolutions, an all-inclusive political settlement. That's what we need. Now, I'm inclined to believe people when they tell me things until I find out that it's not true. Trust and verify, as they say in this country where we're having this interview. In this case, the Ansar Allah leadership have reconfirmed again to me, and I have no reason to disbelieve them, that they want to come to the negotiating table. Let's give them that chance.
The coalition, and also I've seen the letter from the United Arab Emirates mission to the Security Council, and the two Secretary General are saying the liberation of Hodeidah is necessary. At this time, to pressure the Houthis and convince them, incentivize them to come to the negotiating table. Your comment?
I think I would be irresponsible in my own job if I were to depend on the events of the war to be the trigger, if you like, the catalysts of the things that I'm trying to do. So I'm trying to get people to the table, whatever is going on in the war, in order to stop it. Now, as you say, the United Arab Emirates has written that, and the UN.
It's a coalition Yemeni government position.
That's right.
It's a joint.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's fine. I don't challenge that. I'm simply trying to do something slightly different, which is to do whatever I can in the shortest time possible to get political negotiation going, whatever is happening in the war. Every day that the war goes on is a day when mothers lose their sons. So every day, that is the bill that we are charged for inadequate performance in terms of getting to that table. That's the spur, I think, that we have that obliges us to move with all speed, irrespective of what's going on.
How much pressure do you personally feel under to find a solution for the Yemen conflict when you hear Mark Lowcock, for example, Undersecretary for Humanitarian Affairs, saying, he said it last Friday actually in the Security Council, that maybe we are losing the battle against famine in Yemen.
It's alarming, isn't it?
Yes.
Very alarming. No pressure, of course. No. I think it's a very good question, because every conflict costs lives which are unnecessarily lost, as we've heard, to families. The situation in Yemen is such that if that happened, and we must all hope it won't, and these events are not as predictable as some people like to think, it would be a catastrophe for all of us. So, what he says, and I'm sure he's right in his assessment, in his alarm bell, just makes us work that little bit harder. But we would work that hard anyway. We would need to proceed with all speed to a negotiation anyway, because there are already 8 million people being looked after by Mark Lowcock's agencies. We've got to give the Yemeni families back their own rights to run their own lives.
Well, we're thankful to Anga to have you here in New York, but what do you hope to achieve from this session of the Anga 73, and what are your priorities while you're here, and where do you go from here? I mean, to be honest, and I mean physically and also process-wise.
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
Well, I think this is a great opportunity, because you know this place much better than me. It's an opportunity to meet a lot of people in a short space of time. My message is very simple. It's not changed for some months. A political settlement in Yemen is available. It is available. We saw it almost happen in Kuwait. We know the outlines of what the settlement would be under all resolutions and references, and with the full voluntary confidence of the parties. We know that is available. So the message I'm saying is, let's make that availability actual. Can you help me to make that happen? Because it's not just for us, it's for the region. By the way, I worked in Europe before I came to this position in the United Nations, and we in Europe were very worried about trade through the shipping lanes and the potential effect of the Yemen war. Stability in Yemen is a globally important issue. So you ask where I'm going to go next. I'm going to go back to the region straight away. I'll go back to Amman, and we'll go back to planning the restart. That will include visiting the people who have the power to make decisions on those measures, those confidence-building measures we were talking about, on the restart of real consultations, putting the parties together. I'll do that until we're sure we can make that happen safely, and that it will happen this time, and that it will be a start on the process that I'm here to do.
There's no doubt we all wish you the very, very best of luck, but my last question, to be honest, is do you need anything more from the Security Council to help you in your mandate?
Not at this moment, no. It's a very good question again, and I'm often asked that, including by members of the Council. I think we have everything we need from that Council, a remarkable unity on that Council, to do two things. One, to support us and to support me and my team and all the people that we work with to make this process fully understood. And secondly, to remind everybody that the Council's watching. The Council is watching very carefully to look for compliance to its resolutions, look to me to do my job properly for the Secretary-General. And I'd like to end, if I may, by saying something which surprised me and hugely heartened me when I started this job. The Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, who you mentioned earlier, has a deep personal interest in Yemen and a real conviction that the United Nations can fulfill its responsibilities to move Yemen away from the abyss. His personal interest is always a huge help to me. So I'm lucky I have the Council, I have Secretary General. What more could we want?
Needless to say, you have us as well, and the people of Yemen. We all are rooting for you, and I hope you succeed for the sake of the people of Yemen. We wish you all the very best.
Thank
you
very
for
much.
this interview. Thank
Thanks
you,
a lot.
sir.